My buddy Rick and I were traveling through Amarillo at sunset on our way to California from Chicago. On the second day, we took 40 west to 8th south, then down to Yuma. It passes through a lot of desolate, unpleasant desert, yet has wonderful vistas. The sky was stunning, the sunset orange-red-pink over the plain. As the stars came out, I could only see a 2-lane highway into nothing. Something about its beauty made me nervous. Maybe everyone's worried and depressed. We were traveling in the dark, unlit, abandoned I-4, we had petrol and food, but the great open sky above the desert made me feel insignificant. Our recordings were fine, but the drive was boring. We had left Phoenix an hour and a half earlier and were heading down Interstate 8. Then I realized we had gotten lost, looped around, and missed the off-ramp to Yuma. We needed petrol, lunch, and a break. As I fiddled with the chart, Rick pulled off the road and the vehicle flipped. I remarked, "I hope you didn't ground us in the desert sand ridge," then moved the vehicle forward, still on the shoulder. I left after giving Rick the map. Deep, purple, bright desert night, I could see Yuma's glittering light in the distance. Rick stepped out of the vehicle, opened a Coke, and stated, "We'll get there." Unlike me, he was confident. Rick left the vehicle and I heard him pee. I glanced away from the automobile, away from Yuma's lights. I glanced back at the empty I-8, no vehicles. Beyond there, the stark shape of the sunlit desert under the full moon. As I headed back to the vehicle, I saw something incredible. I backtracked. It sat on a rock. Near the top was a gargoyle as on a Gothic church. I thought it was fascinating that someone carved such delicate beauty onto a generic rock. What a magnificent image on a lonely roadway in the desert at night, I nodded. I liked that image till it soared into the darkness. After that, everything blurred. Back to the vehicle. Rick didn't believe I grabbed him. Rick spotted it soaring beneath the moon and above us. Rick drove like a madman. Something flies across the windshield. Giant bat wings were perfect. That? Screamed. Rick agreed. Opinions. He and I told him that. Then something dark struck us. The automobile skidded into the sand. Rick started the vehicle again and the wheels were spinning. We looked about. "Okay, push, I'll shift," he said, and stepped back in the vehicle. Rick rolled back into the road, put the vehicle in neutral, and handed me the flashlight from the glove box. The automobile had no AC, so the windows were down. Rick urged me to beam the spotlight if we saw the monster again, but before we could roll, a large shadow dropped past the window where I was seated. The spotlight revealed a yellow-eyed, leather-faced, devil-horned gargoyle. I yelled, "Drive, drive, drive." We passed Yuma and reached Los Angeles. Desert life persists. Yuma, Arizona, 1995. I've seen some unusual and scary things in my life, some in the military, others in the terrible area where I grew up, but the worst was that night in the desert. In Arizona, we camped. We had a bonfire, played music, and relaxed. I drank like a fish and needed to empty the tanks. I moved north behind a rock formation and peed against it. As I was about to finish, I saw an orange flash above the hill, nearly indiscernible. I was preparing to go check what was happening on the hill. Lawrence was talking about Wendy, one of our pals, when he fell over to pee. I ignored his nonsense. "What is that man's light over the hill?" I told him something was shining over there. I recall he paused, sipped his drink, and pissed before saying, "Let's see." We began afresh as we walked over. He mumbles campfire isn't the only campus. We strolled for an hour, I said, and he whispered. Diane said it was private, so I replied softly. He rambled about Wendy. How can I get up with my lady if others are rushing us like in the mall? We climbed the hill and peered down. No bonfire. There was a fire-like light from a hole in the rocks leading to the ground. How? Lawrence. Nothing. What's that? A volcano. Unsure? If it's too hot, we'll get a thing. Lawrence continued muttering nothing but a thing as we walked near the bright hole. Repeatedly we climbed 30 feet down the slope. When we saw progress. Maybe it's like Old Faithful in Yellowstone, where Lawrence began bulging out stuff. We were both spellbound when he finished. Something emerged from the hole. It seemed like two closed golf umbrellas were being forced out of the hole, but they divided as they left the tunnel. Then two erect ram horns appeared between the opening umbrellas. We believed it was wildlife. We anticipated maybe cow hooves. Animals fleeing a cave fire. When a person sees something that makes no sense, they can only observe until something clicks, thus we saw the head become a human face. Long arms, claws, and fingers follow. It pulled itself out of the hole and the umbrellas opened. We ran. We didn't turn until we reached the campfire. We acted foolishly. Screaming and gasping. Lawrence grabbed a rock and said, "Go." The automobile was 45 minutes away, and nobody moved when we arrived. I grabbed a rock and stood beside Lawrence, who was hyperventilating. Go back to the vehicle. I'm not walking back now, BS. The females stopped sipping their drinks to gaze at us and giggle. You too? Wendy questioned. Satan. Satan. Lawrence stutter-backed. Darren's skepticism as he stood. What's up, jerks? Then we heard something crunching behind us. Why? Asks Darren. This came out of a hole. It was buried. Hellbent. Lawrence paused. You probably witnessed a Gila monster. Janine responded, let's get to the vehicle, and we heard another crunch. No guy, I'm telling you, you don't know, Darren yelled. We froze like mannequins in a retail display, waiting. The whooshing began then. The girls began collecting their belongings as he put her jacket in the lantern and Janine took the sleeping bag from the cooler. Then Darren reached for his bag when a rock fell from the heavens and smashed our bonfire. There were shouts and gasps. The flashlights came on, and Lawrence sprinted into the dark toward where he assumed the automobile was as ashes fell. Something was circling us. The girls were searching with flashlights when Janine's light landed on some red-black flesh flashing above us. We ran. We were terrified and walking sand. Talking helped us relax. Darren's reasoning helped. Wendy thinks it may be a large desert bat guarding its young. Darren discussed animals' territoriality. Darren jerked. He'd been struck. When I inquired whether he was all right, he said to keep going. Janine was hit. She shouted and shrugged. Jogging began. Wendy leaps and yells when anything falls on her like sticks. I'm bombarded. The torch is being whirled around when I hear snakes dropping from the sky. Darren lifted his leg and shined the spotlight. I saw a heap of rattlers. Nobody stayed to see whether they were Mojave rattlers or sidewinders. We rushed sobbing and leaping through the dark. I asked in the vehicle whether anybody had been bitten by Janine. Is there a local hospital? I didn't know, but if someone got bitten by a Mojave and ran for 15 minutes, they'd be dead in 10 minutes. I just knew we had to go quickly. We struggled down the hill to the vehicles when we noticed a large object fall on the opposite side. The creature squatted on the automobile. It was scary. It grew wings and stood. Horns and wings were seen. Lawrence began praying, begging Jesus for compassion. I recall swallowing hard as the object produced a loud clicking sound and soared away. Texans' caverns are fascinating. Because I despised winning and being hurried, I typically went alone. I disliked whiners and rushing. I could hike and cave all weekend. Out and dropped it near the caves at sunset. It was a giant orange ball over the desert. I took photos of the huge orange circle. I noticed it then. I assumed it was a mirage. It occurs in the desert due of heat waves. These ripples or dimples appear. I massaged my eyes, glanced away, and peered back. I noticed condor-sized wings. They flapped widely. It didn't move like a vulture or giant bird, which I found odd. As it drew closer, I saw peaks in its wings like a bat's and thought no way. Maybe it was a mutant fruit bat. The sun hadn't set yet, so the sky was growing darker, but it was still too bright to stare at the sun for long without being phased out. I glanced away, then returned, and it was still there and growing. I took photographs after lifting the camera. I hoped I could film in sunshine or twilight. As the sun set, the bat hovered. As the sun faded and night came, the bat lowered straight down. I observed a human-shaped corpse tumbled to the desert floor. I watched as the light faded on something 100 yards distant. After a minute, it closed its wings and dove into the sand. As the sun set, the bat thing vanished like a mole. I believed sand had covered a fissure. Perhaps it visited a bat cave. I wanted an ATV. Rolling over to capture a photo of a world record bat, but I'm not sure what I saw and didn't know what I may stumble across. I began back down the rocks when I heard a cat-like cry coming from the caverns below. The sound became louder as I carefully made my way down. After about 10 steps, I heard this screeching sound coming from the fissure just beneath me. I was within 15 feet. What it was, it didn't sound pleased. I had just a knife and didn't know what I'd find. I've opted to conceal and wait for this to pass or show itself. I was startled when I heard a rattling, clicking sound in the gap. After 5 minutes of silence, I saw a beautiful lizard face. Yellow eyes and bighorn horns. Iran snorted and leant like a snake. Then I was soaring through the air for 10 to 20 feet before landing. I woke up and ran into cacti. When I leapt on I was bleeding. As I drove away, I passed the monster peering down from the cave hole. I sat there, wings folded, while I drove. We were professional caverns or bunkers, but we intended to journey in October. We heard they were gorgeous and wanted photos. Locals warned us to leave before dusk when we arrived late. He stated nighttime is unsafe. Nighttime creatures emerge. The caverns were natural and not gated or maintained, he cautioned. Expect to see snakes. I was concerned before we walked in because I assumed it would be peaceful, but we were warned about everything. Friends urged me to ignore him. Roger advised me to go to feel significant. That's all. We entered the caverns late in the afternoon, but it quickly grew dark. After a bend, we'd see additional outside light illuminate the path ahead. I would have had them hold flashlights while I shot cave photographs. Lovely. When we reached a ragged entrance, we shone our lights through and saw it dip and bend. Aaron started a hole, want to try. We pondered his conclusion. No one has been here in centuries. He persisted. We did. We turned off our headlamps and pointed back up the trail when I observed light below the fissure. Before turning on their lights, we admired a crack. We noticed an orange glow. Whoa! Asking Sunset. Roger guessed another. 4 of us squeezed through the opening and saw webbed wings. They were 10 feet wide. Something was following us in the cave, and we heard it approaching. Aaron's voice shook as he encouraged us to keep moving as the sound became closer. We escaped the cave, hurried to the vehicle, and stood there gasping. Roger remarked, "I guess he's having fun with us," and Aaron pointed back where we came from. "See?" Aaron remarked, "Do you notice his golden eyes?" I did, and we got in the automobile. Aaron aimed his light up and we saw a red alligator skin slide back into the blackness. I suspect something dwells in those caverns in Arizona's sun-baked desert.